Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about a very important topic, whether you should actually go to law school. Your law school hosts are Allison Monahan, that's me, and Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the Catapult Career Conference. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact forum on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about a very important topic. Who should go to law school? Or to rephrase the question we often hear, should you go to law school? As with any educational experience, people have a variety of reasons for going to law school. But there's one question we always ask. Do you actually want to be a lawyer?
I think that is so critical. And now, you might think this seems obvious. Like, of course, you're going to law school because you want to be a lawyer. But it's actually really remarkable to me how many people tell me, like, yeah, I'm not really sure I want to be a lawyer. And I'm like, well, what in the world are you doing in law school?
Yeah. I think that's true. And I think a lot of people, now that the employment rates for lawyers is not as great as it used to be, I don't know if this happens as much, but I remember when I was entering law school, a lot of people were just going to law school for something to do after school because they felt like, well, it's a pathway to a good job.
Or I just want to get a graduate degree.
Yeah, I can use it a lot of different ways.
Like, you just want a graduate degree. You realize the point of the graduate degree is basically to prepare you for a career.
Right.
It's like, I say this as someone who has a different graduate degree. So, I'm not like holier than thou here. Like, I actually went to architecture school, not ever intending to practice architecture. Argue whether that was a good decision or not. I get it, kind of. But, I think the key thing to realize, and you do hear this a lot, this like, oh, law school just opens up all these paths. It lets you do so much. Do you think that's true?
Gosh, it really depends on what a person's interests are. I think that, we've talked about this even when we have podcasted on starting a business, that you learn a lot of really transferable skills in law school, which is a great thing. But I don't think you need to go to law school to learn those skills.
No, if you want to start a business, probably business school would be a better choice.
Yeah.
Or, even people who, have done an MBA say, no, if you want to start a business, you don't go get an MBA. If you want to start a business, you start a business.
Right.
That's how you learn how to start a business. Like, business school isn't really teaching you that.
Yeah, I think what's more important is, do you need that JD on your resume to get to the next thing that you want to do? I do know friends who have started in paths in politics or in policy or something like that didn't have a JD, and they're like, uh-oh, I really can't go any further even in my own career path unless I get a JD, because that's kind of where the next leap is, even if you're not a practicing lawyer. But
and that's legit.
Yeah, and that's totally legit. But, if you are, coming up with some other ideas, either, you want to start a business. I'm thinking of folks who, do philanthropy. Not philanthropy like Adrian when we talk about his Bayview Hunters Point Community Legal, where he's, offering legal services. But I have friends who are lawyers who are grant writers. Like, if you want to work in grants, I don't know that you need to be a lawyer.
No, a lot of this stuff, if what you're interested in really is public policy, there's probably a faster and easier way to get a degree that's going to propel you down that path. I know my sister did a public policy degree at Columbia, and that was a little over a year. It was sort of like a concentrated year plus one summer. And as a result, it's basically half as expensive as going to law school. It takes half as much time, and it sets her up for the sort of job that she wanted in policy. So, I think sometimes people who are like interested in public policy stuff get sucked into law school thinking like, oh, I have to do this. And maybe it's a good idea.
Right.
But you can also look at, would a master's in public policy be a better option that's faster and actually more focused on what you want?
Mm-hmm. And I think the question that stems from all of this is, do you really know what lawyers do and what some of these jobs actually look like? And I think that is the problem with a lot of folks, especially those who come straight through undergrad, is they may have not even been in the workforce. They maybe know a couple of lawyers or maybe they don't. And I think it is important to try and learn, by either doing informational interviews, by networking, by trying to get a part-time job around a lawyer who does something. Because I think it's important to know, what some of these roles look like. One, to make sure you actually want to do it in the end. And two, so you can say, oh, well, I want to do policy work, and half of these people are lawyers, half of these people have masters in public policy, which path sounds better, and be able to do that analysis of cost, time, other career options and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I completely agree with you. Most people who go to law school typically have no idea what lawyers do on a day-to-day basis or what the variety of different types of lawyering kind of looks like in the real world. People have this idea from watching like The Good Wife or something, like, oh, I'm going to be a trial lawyer, and a week after we get a client, I'm going to be in front of a jury presenting my case. And it's just like, yeah, that's not really that's not what you do, actually.
No, and I've got friends who are doing their first arguments, big arguments now, and we're, 8 to 10 years out.
I mean, there was something on Above the Law recently where some judge chastised a firm, like very violently chastised them for sending a third year to a scheduling hearing.
Yeah, which is incredible.
And it's like, really? You can't send, you've been in 3 years of a big firm practice and you're not considered competent to go to a scheduling hearing by yourself?
Yeah.
I mean, that's remarkable.
Yeah. It is remarkable.
So point being, I mean, I think, people have this idea that they picked up from wherever they've picked it up of what lawyers actually do, but it's probably not accurate. I mean, I think even most people in law school and probably even in the summers and maybe even through those first jobs, like, have really no idea what other types of lawyers do.
I think that's very true. And that's not to mean that if you're not sure what you want to do, you shouldn't go to law school, but it should be an educational process for you. You should be.
Yeah, like you should be making an informed decision here.
Exactly.
This should not be something that, you're like, well, my parents think it's a good idea and I don't really have anything else to do. So, hey, why not?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of money and a lot of time on the line. 3 years of your life is a long time. And it's a lot of money on the line, and you need to make sure that you're going to be able to utilize that. I mean, let's be honest. I think we've done other podcasts on this too. There are a lot of unhappy lawyers out there. I mean, I know a ton, not just us in the circles we run around, but like ex-lawyers. Like ex-lawyers are everywhere, like everywhere, doing all sorts of different things. And what you shouldn't do when you're thinking about going to law school is only talk to happy lawyers. I think it's important to talk to some unhappy lawyers or people who've exited the profession and find out why.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, some people say, well, what's wrong with just going to law school? Like, how bad could it be, And the answer is like, I mean, as you mentioned, it's incredibly expensive. It's extremely time consuming. It's a really stressful way to spend 3 years. And ultimately, it really trains you to do this one thing. And it can actually limit your other options. And I think sometimes when you talk about like, oh, well, there are all these ex-lawyers doing all these other things, that doesn't mean law school trained them to do any of these things.
Like, I mean that they're like chefs and stuff like that. Or yoga teachers or Pilates teachers or
consultants to help other people get out of law.
Right.
No, I mean, the fact that people who used to be lawyers are now doing something else suggests that these are smart people who, when they're really miserable, will actually figure out something else to do. It does not suggest that law school prepares you for any of these other things.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point.
I mean, basically, you're being trained to be a lawyer. And, if you want to go into... Sometimes I see these people who are like, oh, I really want to go into business, but I thought law school was a better choice. It's like, why?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what did you think you were going to get out of this that was going to be considered extra valuable?
Mm-hmm.
Except working as a lawyer in a business context, which you just told me you don't want to do.
Right. And I even have friends who are not lawyers who work in in-house places, kind of in the legal context too, that work on, contract negotiations. Like not, of course, doing anything that would be an improper practice of law, but I mean, there are a lot of people who work on those teams, and a lot of that is just business decisions.
And I think
doing that. It's like you don't have to be a lawyer to participate even in the slightly legal side of conducting a business. If you want to do employment law, or if you want to do, the nitty gritty of mergers and acquisitions, sure. But again, even mergers and acquisitions, to pick companies and to do those deals, that's actually business decisions, not necessarily legal decisions.
Yeah, and I think that's sometimes is where people get confused, because they have this idea like, oh, it'd be so sexy to like be an M&A lawyer. And it's like, I mean, I know people who are M&A lawyers, and they're like, you know what? We actually don't get to do the fun stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, we're the people that get called to like write up the contract that the business people have decided should exist, and they don't care about it. Like, that's just like crap that needs to be done.
Right, or figure out the regulatory requirements and whether or not some merger could go through without violating the regulatory requirements.
Yeah,
not the exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's not fun. I mean, maybe there's certain people who find it interesting, but I think like most of the sexier like side of business is actually on the business side. Mm-hmm. And I think, I don't know, people just seem to have like this misperception, like, oh, I'm going to be like doing these important deals. It's like, you're not doing the deal. You're doing the busy work to close the deal. Yeah. That's a very different thing.
Yeah. I think another thing people have to think about is, one of the ways people like to get information about lawyers or meet lawyers is going to panels, which can be, a really great way to network and to meet different people. But, you always have to be thoughtful about who's on that panel and the stories that they are spinning for you. Because not to say that people are not authentic on the panel. I mean, you and I sit on a lot of panels, and sometimes maybe I'm too authentic about what I talk about.
Exactly.
But
we're probably the exception.
The exception to the rule. But, I think it is very interesting to evaluate, if you go to a panel of women lawyers, be very careful what you listen to about their experiences. Evaluate whether or not their stories sound like something you want to be a part of. Because, work-life balance and balancing any sort of life with the practice of law is something that, of course, you and I are really passionate about, and we talk about a lot. People love hearing from us or not hearing from us about these topics. But sometimes you go to these meetings and you're like, wow, these are these 8 female partners at these big firms showing me how it can be done. And it's like, yeah, are you really listening? Are you really listening to what they're telling you about their lives? And is that the kind of life that you want? And if it is, amazing. Go for it. No judgment. But if it's not, please listen and start evaluating. Or going to a panel with all men, or one woman. I was recently on a panel that wasn't a legally related panel, and I was the only woman on the panel. And we were talking about being entrepreneurs. And then, I had some very different thoughts than some of the men on the panel who are saying things like, well, just don't get married. You can wait until later in life to start a family. Like, I just decided I wouldn't get married before 35. So I had time to do these sort of business things. It's like, okay. So for the women in the room, listen to that. And
right, exactly. Is this the pathway that you want to be setting off? Like, are these the expectations that you want to be signing up for?
Exactly. So again, it's about being, really thoughtful. And I think if you're already in law school, and as you continue to meet lawyers, talk to lawyers, go to panels, listen to different career paths, you constantly have to be listening and evaluating and imagining you in these person's shoes. Is this the story that you want? If it is, go for it. If it's not, pivot and turn. And I think that that's the thing that we really want folks who are considering going to law school to think about. Even if you have been on this path for a while, if it does not feel good to you, you still have time to pivot and do something else.
Yeah, and the time to do that is before you start that process. Mm-hmm. It's like, once a lot of people, I think, kind of get sucked in because they're like, well, I'm an undergrad. I don't really have plans. That's scary. I don't know what I would do. Where am I going to live? What's my job going to be? Am I have to work at Starbucks? Hey, Starbucks, totally valid option for a year or two. They give you health insurance. But, so there's like, well, I'll just, I'll take the LSAT and see how that goes. And then you do pretty well. And you're like, well, I'll just apply and see if I get in anywhere. And then you get in, and then somebody's giving you like a certain amount of money, and your parents are like, oh my gosh, my kid's going to be a lawyer. This is so amazing. And then suddenly that's a lot harder to turn down.
Yeah. And then and then once you're on that path, I mean, I know I've written about it on the Law School Toolbox, but then you do well in law school, and then you get offered a big firm job, and then you take that because you're supposed
to. And then suddenly
you
wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, what just happened?
Yeah, you're like, how did I get this life? Oh, wait, I made a lot of choices that maybe some of which I shouldn't have made.
Yeah, and I think, it's hard, obviously, to predict, like, whether you're going to like law school, whether you're going to like being a lawyer, but I think people just have to be realistic about a lot of things. I think you have to be realistic about the cost of school, which is absolutely extraordinary. They have to be realistic about whether they're going to be able to pass the bar. These are statistics you can get from your law school or your potential law schools. What kind of job are you actually going to be able to get? There's a lot of magical thinking. We've seen a study that was like, they surveyed incoming law students about who thought they were going to be in the top half and who thought they were going to be in the top 10%. And I think 90% of them were sure they would be in the top half, and something like 50% of them thought they would be in the top 10%.
Yeah.
That's not realistic.
Yeah.
And then once you...
go ahead.
I would say once you get the job, you have to be realistic about the fact that law is a very, very demanding profession, almost regardless of the type of law you practice.
I think that's very true. Let's go back to a minute about what you said that I think is an under-researched element when deciding to go to law school and specifically picking your law school. I think we talk about this in our blog post about which law school, our podcast about which law school to go to. But look at those bar passage rates, because it may not be fun to look at numbers, and hey, if you're considering going to law school, maybe you don't like numbers, and I totally understand that. But, most of the bars themselves publish the rates of the pass rates of all the different schools. And it's important to unpack these pass rates. Look at first time pass rates. You want those to be pretty freaking high, because you have to feel like the entire class, that entire graduating class, most of them are going to sit for that bar. And if only, 50% of that class passes, that should be sobering.
Yeah, because you just spent 3 years of your life paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for this education, and now you're not going to be able to actually get licensed because you can't pass the bar.
Yeah.
These people are people are not slacking off when they study for the bar usually. They tried.
Yeah, they definitely tried. And to me, it's that first time pass rate that I think is really critical. I think that looking at the repeat taker pass rates, I think a lot of people fail the bar for a lot of different reasons. You can read all about that on the Bar Exam Toolbox, but, which I won't, discuss here, because if you're listening to this, the bar is probably very far away. But to me, it's really about, are the people who are exiting as 3Ls and have just graduated and study all summer, most of them are going to study over the summer, ready to sit down and take that test and pass it? And to me, that's the biggest number that you need to focus on, because that's going to show you how prepared those students are to pass that test. There's going to be a portion of the population that struggles with test anxiety, that may fail for a lot of different reasons, may have a family crisis, may just struggle academically. But that's going to be probably the people who are at the bottom of your class, more likely than not. So if you're in the top half, top 75% of your class, you want to feel like you're in a good position to pass.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the reality is a lot of these bar passage rates have been dropping for a while. And frankly, a lot of them are pretty frightening. I would be concerned if I was going to a lot of schools now.
Yeah. And I think that, I think the other thing that's hard is that the student wants to say, well, that wouldn't be me. I wouldn't be in the bottom, 50%. It wouldn't be me. Well,
does anyone start thinking, oh yeah, I'm just going to go to law school and do really poorly?
I know.
That's my goal. Nobody says that.
No. And the thing is, when we work with bar takers who are struggling, there are plenty of really, really, really smart people who fail the bar. And sometimes it's a product of maybe a less, than great legal education.
Yeah. So, I think, all right, let's back up a little bit. So we're telling people all these horror stories about how they're going to fail the bar and no one should go to law school because they have to work a lot.
This has turned kind of dark all of a sudden. I don't know how that happened.
I was like, I thought we were supposed to be having a happy one. Well, let's talk about it. So somebody's listening to this and they're like, I have some interest in being a lawyer. Not entirely sure I know what they do, but I'll go try to find out. I guess my question, when I think about it, I try to frame it as there are a few questions that you need to really be able to answer to be able to say, yes, I think this is a good choice for me. So I'm going to just go ahead and give you some of those. You can tell me what you think about them.
Okay, sounds good.
I think the first one is what are you actually good at?
That's a good one.
like I went to architecture school. I was terrible at everything that was required to be an architect. And I knew that going in. I went because I thought it would be challenging. But, there's certain things that everybody should know at this point. Lawyers basically do. They read, they write, they speak. Are these actually things that you're good at? Mm-hmm. And then also, what do you like? Sometimes people are like, oh, like I'm a really fast reader, but I hate reading. It's like, well, then you probably shouldn't go to law school.
Right. Or I hate writing. I hear that too.
Yeah, I hate writing. I'm a bad writer. I don't like writing.
Yeah.
It's like, well, then you probably are not going to enjoy this experience because basically lawyers read and write.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the kind of questions that, you've got to ask yourself. And then obviously you have to know what do lawyers actually do. And then is there sufficient overlap between these categories for this to make sense?
Mm-hmm. And that's very true. I think I'd add something to that, which is, do you like conflicts and working with folks who are in a struggle, whether it's a corporate struggle? I mean, most lawyers work, if they're practicing, are working with people when they're dealing with something difficult,
Right.
Even if you're writing somebody's wills, nobody's died, but that's still something very difficult that you're working with somebody through. If you are doing corporate litigation, you are helping a corporation through something that is difficult or at least very expensive. We were talking about mergers and acquisitions. That can be very stressful for the clients as well. High pressure.
Yep. Almost no one's in a good mood when they meet with their lawyer.
Yeah, no, not often. I mean, maybe some lawyers that get to do like really positive, maybe child adoption when it works out.
Yeah, but even then, like you're stressed out until it works out.
That's true. Maybe you get get a Christmas card that everything worked out well.
No, I mean, it's great. Like, I'm sure it's fantastic. I've seen friends of mine who have adopted kids in court with their lawyer and everyone's happy. But it's like, how long did it take to get to that point?
That's true. It's true. It's kind of like a therapist. Very few people ever go to your therapist to go like, everything is so amazing. Let me tell you how wonderful everything is.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's reality that I'm not sure. I definitely didn't really totally appreciate before I went to law school. Is like, you're dealing with high stress situations, typically with people who are unhappy, often with time pressure, and you're working a lot of hours. Mm-hmm. And often people are not at their best, whether it's opposing counsel or the people you're working with or your clients or the other client. I mean, it's just, you're in a world, I think you're absolutely right. You're in like this world of conflict basically all the time.
But then I want to flip that on its side, because actually the thing that I've always found special about the law is that, yes, you are working with people who are in conflict or in a high stress situation, but you have the ability to walk them through that. And I think that is actually, for me, what's always been something very special about the law, is that as you become a lawyer, as you become educated in the law, as you become kind of the gatekeeper to help people solve their problems, I think that's actually kind of magical. So that to me is the special kind of, I don't know, woohoo part of becoming a lawyer that actually means a lot to me, because over the years, I have seen so many people's lives be changed for the better by having good legal help. Of course, there's also bad legal help, which is a different thing, but nobody listening to this will be a bad lawyer, I'm sure. So let's just talk about how we can help
very
people.
Above average.
Exactly. But there is some special stuff, when you get to stand next to a client and really help solve their problems and change their life, that's amazing. Like, it really is amazing. With that comes a lot of high stress situations and a lot of work, which you have to be okay with. But some of the stuff can be magical. Now, some of the corporate law can maybe not be so magical, but
right. Well, I was going to ask about that. I was going to ask you about this because I think, like, listening to you, I hear this like, oh, like such an idealistic profession, and I want to go into it to help people. And if you look at studies, like most people go to law school because they do want to help people.
Yeah.
But then somehow that doesn't end up happening in a lot of cases. Like, that's not the work that they're really doing on a daily basis. So I'm not sure how to kind of square those things.
Well, I think it's a lot. It goes back to researching the different types of law and how you want to work. I mean, I'll be honest, when I was doing big scale corporate defense and we would win at trial, it's not like I got the warm and fuzzies. Because
half the time it's like, imagine you're like a firm environmental lawyer. You're like, yes, we can keep polluting.
I know, exactly. It's kind of like, even if I thought that opposing counsel was kind of, ridiculous and shouldn't have won, there are typically still plaintiffs who are people on the other side that are maybe not going to make you feel awesome about yourself sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason, if you're getting paid a lot to be a lawyer, there's typically a reason. And a lot of times that reason is because what you're doing is not necessarily what you might want to be doing.
Yeah. So if you are going to law school because you want to aspire to my sappy explanation of how the law can really change people's lives, then you want to start looking at the possibilities of the ways that you can do that. Are children your passion? If you want to work with children, you need to spend the time before law school or during law school learning the different options about how you can do that. And if you want to stand in court with a child who gets adopted out of foster care, make sure that you are setting yourself up for that. Because if you
make sure somehow you can pay your bills.
Well,
and still
fair
do
point.
that.
Very true.
I know it's I think people have to be really realistic about if you have say you have $150,000 in student loan debt, which is not at all uncommon. It's probably below average. And you're looking at a salary working for, the Children's Defense Fund or something of $35,000 a year in a major city.
Right.
How do you make that work?
Right.
You need an answer to that before you sign up.
Exactly. And there's always the promise of, what do they call loan forgiveness
LRAP.
programs? Yeah. Things like that. But, sometimes that works out. Sometimes it doesn't, but you really need to understand what that means if you're going to try and utilize some of that programming.
Oh, yeah. And you need to talk to people who are in it, because everyone I know who has signed up for it has been like, wow, this sounded so amazing when I was sitting at orientation. And now that I'm in the thick of it, I realize it's actually not what it sounded like.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really know. My law school roommate, one of them graduated with $200,000 in debt and is doing public interest work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Very, very difficult.
So going back to your original questions, though, so if you're good at the things that lawyers do and you like it and you appreciate what they do, should you just go to law school because you're good at it? Or like you said with architecture school that you wanted a challenge? Is that enough of a reason? If you're good at it, will you enjoy being a lawyer?
No, I think absolutely not. And you've got to be careful about this. I think I have a post somewhere on one of our sites about don't just do things because you're good at them. Mm-hmm. Make sure this is really something that you want to be doing, because maybe it's just the case that, you have a natural aptitude for certain things and that's been encouraged throughout your life, but actually you'd be way happier, I don't know, working I love the ones where people I like to write, so I want to go to law school. And in some ways, that's valid. Lawyers need to be really good writers. They do a lot of writing. Mm-hmm. But if what people mean by that is, I want to write fiction or I want to be a journalist, those are really different ways of writing.
Right. Right. If you want to work for a judge long-term as a research attorney and read and write all day at your desk, that's can be totally valid. Find out what that actually looks like.
Yeah, I think, obviously doing things that are, that you're already good at, you have a leg up, basically. Maybe you're really good at, I love also too, I'm really good at arguing. I love debate. It's okay, that's not really what lawyers do, but,
Yeah.
Great. We don't just stand around and argue all the time. No, I think, you've got to kind of evaluate, where are your strengths? What are the skills that you've worked to acquire? What are the skills you're willing to acquire? What are the things that make you feel alive when you're doing them? Mm-hmm. And if those align with the law, great. If they don't, maybe you should look at other options.
Yeah. But, while you're going through this process, if you're thinking about finishing your applications, sooner rather than later, really think about when you're writing your entrance essays, what is in those entrance essays? Why is this important to you? And take a step back from just, shoveling what they want you to hear and start thinking about how you would answer those questions about why you want to be a lawyer or why you want to go to law school. Because I think if you can start to be authentic about what your goals and desires are from the, beginning of the process, I think it's going to serve you really well.
Yeah, I agree. I think people who know what they're doing and why they're going to law school and they're focused when they come in tend to be a lot happier and tend to do better and tend to get a job that actually is more closely aligned with what they think is going to work for them.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's not to say that you can't pivot later. If you're wrong, it's okay. It's not like you're trapped in this one, linear job forever or job career path forever. But I think it's better to go to law school thinking that you want to do something with this degree.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's flip it around a little bit. So You said, well, should you go to law school just because you're good at it? And I'm like, no, probably not. But what about these people who like really want to be lawyers, but they're not actually that good for whatever reason at the things that lawyers do? Like, say, for example, someone may have a learning issue that they know is going to make this hard for them. Do you think that's disqualifying?
I mean, I don't think it's disqualifying, but I think you better go in as prepared as you can. You know, if you, for instance, if you have an identified learning issue that you know is going to make certain parts of law school challenging, please work on getting advice for coping mechanisms and learn about accommodations in the law school environment, if you can, about how your school will do that, how the bar exam will do that, so you can know you'll be set up for success. Because, you know, if writing under time pressure is something, you know, that is really, really difficult for you to do, writing under time pressure is a huge part of not only practicing law, but also successfully getting through law school and the bar exam. So you really need to learn about either how you can better yourself, to give yourself some new tips, tricks, techniques to get past things, or, you know, you need to really be honest about whether or not this is a good fit for you as an individual.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, people go to law school all the time with all sorts of things that make it challenging. Like, you know, people who are blind graduate from law school and pass the bar. People who are deaf. People have all sorts of different learning issues.
Physical issues, yeah.
Yeah, physical issues, all sorts of stuff. Like, it's definitely doable. But I think you've just got to be realistic, again, about what it is you're getting into. And I think your point about sort of dealing with this stuff up front and making sure you're getting whatever accommodations you need to be successful is really the way to go.
Yeah, because it's heartbreaking. And I've watched people have to make this decision. It's heartbreaking to decide once you're already in, you know, that some of these barriers might really stand in the way of becoming the, you know, lawyer that you want to be. And if at all possible, if you can either figure out what solutions are out there to get you past those barriers, or if you decide that maybe there's a different way you can interact with the law that will, you know, still be a great fit for you and still feed your passions, you know, that could be better. So like most things, it's about talking to people and getting as much information as you can from, you know, your prospective law school and maybe from other mentors or folks that you can talk to about, you know, how they're surviving with their challenges.
Yeah,
thriving.
absolutely.
Not just surviving, but thriving.
Yeah, that's the goal. Our goal is not just to get through.
Right.
All right, we're about out of time, but before we wrap up, let's just talk about what can people do if they're really just not sure this is the right fit for them. They're sort of interested, but they just don't know.
Well, we've already talked a lot about talking to lawyers and ex-lawyers, happy ones and unhappy ones. I think it's a really good job to talk to a lot of different people and put yourself in their shoes. I think, you know, it's a really good time to just think about, you know, maybe what you want out of life. We've talked about in other podcast episodes, almost writing your own mission statement, I guess. But, you know, really, what do you want your life to look like? Do you want to be, you know, surfing in Costa Rica for 4 weeks out of every year? If so, that's great. Make sure you're making career choices that align with that. No judgment.
Absolutely.
That sounds awesome, but you know,
that's not the life of a big firm.
It's not a life of a big firm lawyer. And I think you can even test some stuff out. You can even read some cases. You know, does this seem awful to you? If it's awful, you're going to be spending most of your time in law school reading cases.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody should read at least a few cases before that should really be like a precursor to the LSAT. Like before you can sign up to the LSAT, you have to, you know, read these 3 cases and brief them. Pipe dream.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think also people have to be careful a little bit about like this intellectual exercise, because some people are like, oh, it's so fun. I love reading cases, but then you hate everything else about being a lawyer. So
right.
One thing to be aware of, but basically if you can't sit through a couple of cases and find them like reasonably interesting, you're probably going to hate law school and you're going to hate being a lawyer.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. I mean, if you are really struggling with this decision, I think it's a great opportunity to talk to a coach or a career counselor. I mean, yes, it's a financial investment, but so is law school.
Yeah, so, comparatively speaking, really minor.
But they can really, you know, help open your eyes to what you're signing up for and challenge some of these assumptions you're going in with. I think that's one of the most powerful things that having any sort of a coach or a trainer or whatever person that you have in your life kind of keeping you accountable can do. But oftentimes they can just show you where you might be, making some leaps or ignoring some information, or maybe even telling yourself some fictions, which we all do at different times. And that can really be enlightening when you're making big life choices.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having that more objective perspective, who's not a parent, not like, someone who has a vested interest in your decision, who's really just there to help you figure out, does this make sense for you, can be really valuable. And relatively speaking, the cost investment of money and time in a couple of sessions with a career coach is nothing compared to 3 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars for law school.
Yep.
I think the other thing we can do, you mentioned earlier briefly, is, get a job in a legal organization. See what that life looks like. It doesn't matter if you're, a secretary. This doesn't have to be a prestigious job, but you just want to get your foot in the door so you can really see like, oh yeah, like I can see myself doing that, or, oh no, definitely not.
And there's no race to life. I mean, I think some people feel like, oh, I have to go straight into law school after undergrad. I think that that's actually not necessarily true. I think you can gain a lot by taking a breather, get a little life experience, make a little money, get to experiment with some jobs, learn some soft skills, and you might actually find out that this is what you want to do and you're really passionate about it and you're probably going to do better at law school because of that. Or you're going to look at the people above you and say, wow, this looks awful. I don't want to be a part of this. I really should do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having that entry level job and where you're doing the grunt work and you're getting like, crappy assignments or whatever is actually very character building. And I think a lot of legal employers are really looking for that. They would prefer someone with a couple of years of experience, even if it's, not particularly like fancy work experience, just because then you've been through that. Like, what it's like to get up and go to work every day, even if you don't feel like it, and sit at your desk for 8 hours a day and do stuff you may not want to do.
Yep.
That's valuable life experience.
No, it's very, very true. I think we talked about that in a recent podcast episode where we had a bunch of experts talking about the 21st century lawyer, and they were talking about how those soft skills are so important, and recruiters really look at that. Even if it's working at Nordstrom, if they know that you've been doing client facing and learned some of those valuable lessons, they look favorably on that.
I was, speaking poorly of Starbucks earlier. I wasn't really, but I think that's actually like even being a barista, like you're in a fast paced environment. It's high stress. You've got people lined up. You've got to like get stuff right. It's detail oriented. That's actually valuable for whatever job you end up doing as a lawyer.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Well, unfortunately, I think with that, we are out of time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on iTunes. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our new episodes that come out every Monday. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon, and good luck with your law school decision.